It's the blob that ate Washington. In 6 years, the interest on this monstrous debt is going to be more than the Defense Department, and 1 year after that, it'll be more than all the domestic programs of the federal government. It is going to consume the government. We'll talk about that later, but in the news was that horrible picture of a pilot from Jordan being burned alive in a cage by these monsters who call themselves the Islamic State in the Levant. Well, the government of Jordan sent a strong signal back to them, and they executed 2 terrorists after the brutal butchery of that pilot. The terrible thing was that they were holding out a negotiation as if the pilot was still alive, and we learned that the video was shot at least 30 days ago, and the pilot was already dead when the negotiations started. So they are deceitful, and nobody can trust them again. And so they had a pre-programmed, beautifully scripted execution so the whole world could see in horror.
Diabolical. Well, now the crisis in the Middle East could even get worse, with Jordan promising an earth-shaking response to the ISIS killers. Gary Lane has the story.
An ambulance transports the bodies of 2 al-Qaeda terrorists executed at this prison. The Jordanian government made good on its pledge to kill the terrorist captives if the Islamic State harmed Air Force pilot Maoz el-Qassasbeh. It took the action after a gruesome video appeared on the internet this week, showing the caged Jordanian pilot being burned to death by ISIS militants. The video is too graphic for us to show you, but it sparked outrage and protests throughout the Jordanian kingdom. And this response from President Obama as he met with Jordanian King Abdullah at the White House Tuesday.
It's just one more indication of the viciousness and barbarity of this organization.
ISIS militants captured Qassasbeh after his plane went down during an airstrike in Syria last December. The Jordanians had hoped to exchange the pilot in a swap offered by ISIS. The Islamic State wanted to win the release of this female terrorist. But before the exchange could be arranged, the Jordanians demanded one big condition.
We want to see a proof of life.
But when that gruesome video of the pilot's death by incineration appeared on the internet, the Jordanians knew it was too late for a hostage swap. As a matter of fact, the pilot's death may have actually occurred a month ago, long before exchange talks began. The Jordanian pilot execution video came just days after ISIS released a video showing the beheading of a Japanese Christian journalist.
At some point, this kind of act backfires on a group like ISIS.
The Jordanian government had promised to retaliate by delivering a strong, earth-shaking, and decisive response to their pilot's murder. What isn't known at this time is if the execution of the 2 al-Qaeda terrorists is it, or a much greater response is yet to come. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Thanks, Gary. The Jordanians have a very powerful military. They have a powerful air force. They have a powerful ground force. They're desert fighters who are allied with the Hashemite kingdom that is the kingdom of Jordan, the ruling family. But there's a lot of unrest in Jordan. So the question is, how far can the king go before the Palestinians or some radical group decides they want to overthrow him? So how much leeway he's got, we don't know. But I do think he's going to turn loose his air force to go after ISIS. Well, our CBN News terrorism analyst, Eric Stakelbeck, is joining us now from Washington. And Eric, why would a organization put out a video that's clearly going to inflame and energize their enemies?
Well, Pat, it's interesting because on one hand, this absolutely energizes ISIS's enemies. Look at Jordanians in the streets protesting against ISIS. But on the other hand, and this is tough to wrap our heads around, Pat, there are people around the world who see ISIS beheading people and setting people on fire, raping women and children. And, Pat, they're not repelled by it. They're actually drawn to it. I know it sounds crazy to people, but we have thousands and thousands of recruits from right here in the West who continue, after all the beheading videos, after the burning video yesterday, they will continue to flock to the Islamic State. They are drawn to this kind of sadistic violence, especially here in the West. Pat, look, we've been raised on a culture here over the past several decades of violent movies, video games, torture, bloodshed in everything we watch. It's almost people have become desensitized to it. and they see what ISIS is doing. They think it's a cool thing, all this blood, gore, violence, and conquest. But the main thing is ISIS is winning. They are expanding their territory, and success plus this gore and this sadistic violence breeds attraction to many, many radical Muslims around the world.
Eric, ISIS stands, as I understand, for Islamic State in Syria, and then ISIL stands for Islamic State in the Levant. Do you think the president's ever going to call these people Islamic terrorists?
No, I don't think he is, Pat. I think we're in for a rough ride over the next 2 years until President Obama leaves office in 2016. He refuses to make the connection between Islamic theology and Islamic terrorism. This organization is called the Islamic State. That should tell you all you need to know. And look, Pat, you and I have discussed here in the history of Islam, there is a long history of conquest and jihad. President Obama doesn't seem to want to acknowledge that. And it's actually, at this point, Pat, it's actually, the American people are not stupid. I mean, when he comes out again and again and say this has nothing to do with Islam, no Islamic connection whatsoever, the American people are kind of on to the game right now. They see what's going on. They see the litany of bloodshed and severed heads, and they're kind of making the connection, especially since 9/11, that something might be wrong here within Islam. Now, the great thing, Pat, would be if moderate Muslims who oppose jihad and Sharia would step up in large numbers and oppose this. But so far, sadly, we're not seeing that in any kind of major way.
It looks like I mentioned yesterday that the president is willing to allow use of some force in Iraq to drive the ISIS fighters out of Iraq, but he will not lift a finger about Syria. What do you have about that?
Well, Pat, look, this is going to be the status quo until President Obama leaves office. He wants to confine this conflict against ISIS to Iraq. He does not want to expand it into Syria. And a major reason he does not want to expand it into Syria is because of the strong Iranian presence in that country. Let's remember, President Obama, as part of his legacy, or what's left of it, wants to strike a grand bargain with Iran over its nuclear weapons program. So, to get involved in any major kind of way in Syria is kind of stirring the hornet's nest with Iran. He doesn't want to do that. Basically, he wants to manage this thing, Pat, until he leaves office, leave it for the next president. But here's the problem. He wants to manage ISIS, but it's an unmanageable problem. This is a problem, Pat, and an enemy and a threat. Like the Germans in World War II and like the Japanese in World War II, a sadistic enemy that needs to be decisively destroyed and crushed. No half measures. Decisive victory. Stamping out this ISIS threat is the only thing that's going to work. And President Obama, other Western leaders don't seem to get that. Ironically enough, the one guy who does get it, Benjamin Netanyahu, has become the scorn of these Western leaders instead of embracing him in this fight against Islamic jihadists.
Eric, last question. The Iranians are hardly our friends. What kind of a deal does he think he's going to make? The Iranians are trying to assert influence in Iraq. They, of course, got their own country, and they have got control of Hezbollah. They are threatening the whole Middle East, and he thinks he's going to make a grand bargain with them? Tell us about it.
He apparently believes that, Pat. And look, the Iranians, and we're going to have more on this on the 700 Club coming up in the coming weeks, the Iranians now effectively control 4 Arab capitals: Beirut in Lebanon, Damascus in Syria, Baghdad in Iraq, and Sana'a in Yemen. The Iranians are expanding their influence around the region. By the way, they're increasingly encircling Israel. But President Obama believes that these are reasonable chaps and that he can strike a grand bargain with them over that Iranian nuclear weapons program. Basically, Pat, he seems willing and ready to basically hand the keys to the Middle East over to Iran while we evacuate. At the end of the day, Iran continues to be the world's #1 state sponsor of terrorism. That has not changed. The Iranians are working with everyone from Hamas, Hezbollah, obviously, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda. Iran has helped arm and fund. Iran is the head of the snake of the entire global jihadist problem. Yet we think that they are our friends. And I read a report, Pat, in Israeli media last week that apparently President Obama has agreed to some 80% of Iran's demands already in these nuclear talks. And by the way, for our audience, one of the main things the Iranians will not give up in these nuclear talks is their long-range ballistic missile program, and they are working right now on ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, Pat, that can reach the United States. But the Obama administration is not demanding that Iran give up that missile program.
Eric, God bless you. Ladies and gentlemen, somebody in America elected that man and elected him for a second term. And the question is, can we survive as a nation these next 2 years before we get him replaced? I know that sounds hard, but it's difficult. Now, look, Eric has a book coming out. He's a, prolific writer, and it's coming out on March the 9th. It's called ISIS Exposed. We'll be looking forward to it. And so, Eric, we look forward to that book, and thank you for your commentary. Jordan, is right next to Syria, and it's next to Iraq. It's pretty tenuous, some of the borders. And while Jordan is cracking down on ISIS terrorists, others are still captive to what is called political correctness. We'll have that report later on today's show. But first, it looks like Great Britain is going to enter a, quote, brave new world. Now get this, they're going to create babies who could have not one, not two, but three parents. Wow. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau. Here's John.
Pat, British lawmakers have taken a step to approve a new technique meant to keep genetic diseases from being passed from mother to child. It's a process that allows babies to be created from the DNA of 3 people, 2 women and 1 baby. The technique involves an embryo to be altered before it's transferred into the mother, a move currently forbidden by British law. But it will only be used on a limited basis at first to babies who have a specific problem that could lead to diseases like muscular dystrophy, heart, kidney, and liver failure, among other disorders. But opponents warn the DNA swapping technique isn't safe or ethical and could lead to designer babies. If Britain approves the move, the first baby with 3 biological parents could be born as early as next year. Pat, of course, that would still have to pass through the House of Lords.
I don't know what the Lords are going to say about it, but it's outrageous. The problem is when we start tinkering around with these things, there are hidden attributes that are in the genes of people that the scientists haven't yet figured out. And these are the genes that keep us from having, strange maladies or being susceptible to various types of diseases. So we start making designer babies and we say, oops, we left out something that we didn't know was supposed to be in there in the mix. And, it's a horrible concept. Huxley wrote Brave New World, and this is a brave new world that I'm not sure I want to enter. John?
Pat, some 20 people are dead in Taiwan after a Trans-Asia flight turned on its side midair, clipped an elevated highway, and careened into a shallow river. The turboprop plane was carrying 58 people. You can see the dramatic video clip here, taken from a car on Taiwan's national freeway. Rescuers are searching in the river for the missing. More than half of the passengers were Chinese, traveling to the Taiwanese-controlled Kinmen Islands. A spokesman for Trans-Asia said the plane crashed just 4 minutes after takeoff and that the cause is unknown. Well, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives voted to repeal Obamacare again. It's the latest move in the GOP effort against the president's health care law, which passed by Democrats without a single Republican vote. The law remains unpopular in the polls, and the bill now goes to the Senate. But President Obama says he will veto any move to overturn his signature health care plan. The law faces a major Supreme Court challenge later this year. Well, the U.S. national debt now stands at $18 trillion, and it's projected to reach $25 trillion within a decade. And paying off the interest on that debt is likely to get very expensive in the years ahead. Right now, with low interest rates, the government spends $200 billion a year on interest payments. But the Wall Street Journal reports government forecasts show that those payments are going to shoot up, reaching $800 billion a year by the end of this decade. That will be more than the defense budget and other important parts of the federal budget. And those payments, those interest payments, could go much higher in the years after that, meaning the national debt is going to become very expensive. And Pat, that could lead to higher taxes in the years ahead.
Well, that's the least of our worries is higher taxes. It's going to cripple our economy. It will mean that vital government services are not available. But ladies and gentlemen, the big giant in the room, the gorilla, if you will, in the room, is the so-called entitlements. And we've got a baby boom bump in our demographics that is moving through the thing, and the baby boomers are hitting 65 every year. Great numbers, great cohorts. And as they enter into retirement, they're going to draw down on their savings, and they're going to be looking to the government to pick up the tab. And the cost is going to be astronomical because health care for the aged is much, much higher than people in their 20s. And so the health care bill is going to go up astronomically. The bill for retirement services and those who have not got any retirement at all except Social Security, it's going to be incredible. And they won't face it. People are scared of political fallout, and they won't face this thing head on, and unless they do, it's going to destroy our economy, and it's going to mean we'll be living in poverty. We'll be a third world country. It's not just higher taxes. It's going to be really serious stuff. And it's the result of profligacy. If somebody spends all their money and they go out and they get drunk and they buy, expensive cars and things like that, and they wind up broke, then they're in trouble. There's a story in the Bible about a prodigal son who wasted his living in riotous living. Well, that's what we've been doing. We've been wasting our resources. And how you pay off 18 trillion, I don't know, but it's going to be not 18, it'll be 19, 20, 21, 22, 23. And the interest rates will be alarming. So please, let's do something about it while there's time.
3 militaries using ground troops and warplanes fought the radical Islamic group Boko Haram on at least 2 fronts in Africa today, with hundreds of the Islamic fighters reported dead. The battle against Boko Haram is taking on a growing international perspective, with more African nations fighting against them. Well, classes are resuming at one Virginia college today after the entire campus was closed down by an outbreak of the norovirus. Hampden-Sydney College had been shut down since Saturday to prevent the extremely contagious virus from spreading. The drastic step was taken after nearly 300 students contracted the stomach bug. School officials worked for days to sanitize every room on campus, since the virus can remain contagious for up to 2 weeks. The college disinfected just about the entire campus, from student housing to bathrooms and all public areas. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.